And I have suggested to them, in no particular order, that they might just at this point take a deep breath and comment and reflect on what they had heard today and any meanings, any connections, any contrasts, any observations that they choose to make. And they could make none if they wish. And then we go over to you, and it would be your opportunity to raise any subject that you wish, and we'll just roll with the punches. And at the end, I do need about 1 minute to properly thank them and give them a very important gift that we arranged to have produced in their honor from the People's Republic of China. Okay? So post-capitalist. You know? So here we are. Who would like to go first? Zoe?
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for this opportunity to reflect, which I had no prior notice of.
She didn't read the agenda.
Clearly. Just a couple of things I would say. One is what I've noticed working in a public university is in recent years, sometimes at meetings in our university, there will be phrases like publicly funded university. And that started to kind of wear on me after a while, and I realized that's a kind of thin edge of a wedge that kind of starts to undermine what it is we talk about when we talk about public education, public universities, public media, and so on. And so I just want to reflect on how I think it's very important for us to be aware of how there's a slippage going on from public, which has a bunch of normative claims about it, which are contested for sure, but at least open up a possibility of a discussion about politics and struggle, to publicly funded, which starts to sound like, well, that's just one revenue source out of others, and you will also have private funding and so forth. So I think insisting on the publicness in the strongest possible terms rather than publicly funded is something very important. I've also reflected that one of the things that we heard a lot today is how public media are expected to take risks. So whether that's in establishing new platforms or new aesthetic forms. And so in a sense, what we're doing is, as a community or as a society, is we're socializing the risks. And then once the risks have been taken, we're sort of privatizing the profits. And so I think it's interesting to think about how the role that public media play there in using our collective resources as the public to take all the risks, but then hand over the profits as soon as it becomes stabilized. And the final thing I'd want to say that I thought about today was the generation gap, which has been spoken about a lot. And I noticed during the years, especially of Stephen Harper, when the CBC was being radically defunded and its mandate was being watered down, and it no longer sort of was able to fulfill its grand goals and ambitions. At that same time was the time that we heard that young people are unplugging from television and cutting the cord and so forth. And I realized, I reflected in that period of how quickly it could happen, even in 10 years or something like that. That's a long time in an 18-year-old's life. That quite quickly, young people can grow up without having any particular affiliation to these institutions that for older members of the community mean something different, that we still hold on to, like I said before, in this kind of cruelly optimistic way, that we still think of it as something that could be something great. But it can very quickly happen that young people don't have that association with it. And so we have to think about why those of us who are older in the community, what are we holding on to? Is it something that exists now, or is it something that ever existed? Is it something that we want to make happen in the future? And if so, we need to get young people connected to what that could be, rather than assuming that why should they have any affiliation to it if all they have experienced is the defunded versions and the kind of shallow mimicry of commercial broadcasts. So I just think that's important to recognize how quickly that happened. And I don't know how easy it will be to pull that back. So those are some of my thoughts.
You remind me of the autobiography of Simon Signoret.
Oh.
It's the English version is nostalgia isn't what it used to be. Yeah. Who wants to go next?
I'll just pick up on something that Zoe mentioned there about this idea of being part of a public, and I was in my talk trying to talk about that there are still there's continuity in policy and goals, if not in the technology itself. And it brought to mind a line from Graham Spry when they founded the CBC in '32, and he said to Parliament about radio, he said, its potentials are too great, this majestic instrument, he said, it cannot be left to the petty purpose of selling cakes of soap. And I think we're still kind of dealing with this in this divide of let the market decide, and are we just still about selling soap? Is that really what we're going to do with this technology? We're at this moment right now where the door's open. There are incredible opportunities of directions that we can go right now, and I think these are very political decisions that we need to make. I don't think it's as clear-cut as we have public going this way, private going this way. I do think there are other alternatives. There are, as I said, conditions of license that you can give to private providers. There are other ways in which you can make the private sector serve public goals as well. So I think we have to be careful at this moment that we do not see this as a binary decision, that there are other avenues, and Canada has done this in the past. So I think it's a matter of recognizing that this period of technological upheaval, I mean, it was so clearly outlined in Bob's talk this morning, all the incredible changes happening in the last 10 years. But we shouldn't feel helpless. We've been through periods like this before. This brings into, to me, a sense of what Zoe was saying about a sense of collective, of perhaps a greater public purpose. And then also, as Manfred was saying, about the overall public goals, even what the private broadcasters can offer, they aren't just about selling soap. We can ask more than that. We've done so in the past. We can do it again. So I think that there still are these decisions that we have to make that are profoundly political, and it will have to happen within the next 5 years as these things come to more of a maturity. But I think it's an engagement and a discussion that we have to have.
It's your choice.
Maybe I also may pick up what Zoe was mentioning at first about public education. In Germany, we have the discussion, in general, we always had public education by local authorities or by the Länder on the university level. And now, successively, also private universities come in where you have to pay for it. So the discussion is, it's a different type of good that's provided, that's one thing. And the other thing is, you can see again that education both has a private element, it is to the benefit of people that do get educated, they get higher incomes, they get better jobs, but it also is to the benefit of the society, which is better able, if many people are highly educated, to manage the public problems and to be a capable society or economy. And that's a nice analogy to what the media content is. It's partly a private good, as the consumers have their individual fun or benefit from it, but it's partly also a public good. And you never can really separate both components, neither qualitatively, but of course not quantitatively by saying it's a 40-60% range, but this is a political decision mainly. And this, in this regard, I agree with Greg that much of what is involved in the organization of media systems is not determined by the degree of excludability from a technical or economic regard, but from a political regard. The society has to decide if they want to exclude some content to make the market work and to give private companies opportunity to make money with it, or if they want it provided for everybody for free as a common good, with the disadvantage, some would say, that the market's, let's say, capabilities to be very efficient cannot be used in these parts. But with the advantages, with a lot of advantages, if it's a non-rivalry good, you can, we talked about it in the morning very briefly, the marginal costs are zero. And so the more goods we have with marginal cost like zero, the less arguments there are left to run it privately. And the more arguments we have to run these organizations as public organizations. This fits into the idea of monopolies, like the big five you mentioned, not to run according private market rules anymore, because it doesn't make much sense. Once you have zero marginal costs, you can read in every economic textbook that the market doesn't work then anymore. So this is it's one thing that relates to the argument, well, education, for instance, should be organized publicly, and the same ideas we have to discuss for the future provision of media content. And of course, we have to very carefully have to distinguish between what media content we talk about. Of course, there is media content with very little public relevance, yeah? Okay, and I would agree, of course, that we say everybody who is able to pay for it gets it, and who's not able to pay for it, he doesn't get it. It's like a Mercedes, you know? We wouldn't ask everybody to get a Mercedes, but we would ask everybody to have the right for elementary education, the right for information that is necessary to understand society, to take part in public communication. So it's really, these are different things, and we cannot argue for one solution for everything, which makes it understandable that we have different types of provision for information or for media, and that we always have to think about which allocation mechanism or provision mechanism we want to use for what type of media content.
Bob?
Well, thank you all. You have great energy to be here the whole day. It's much appreciated by all of us up here. You know, I think last night, Ian, you and I were talking, you said that in the charter for the Friends of Canadian Broadcasting, that one of the two main objectives is to promote Canadian democracy, something along those lines. And I think that's been an undercurrent in all our talks, clearly, sometimes an overcurrent, but generally an undercurrent. The point, media is a means to an end. It's both a means and an end. But it's crucially important if we're going to have anything remotely close to the exercise of democracy. And, you know, I think Zoe made some really important points about sort of a hollowed out democracy in name only. And I think, as Nick pointed out, that it really has to take substance to actually make people actually have power and information and be really players, govern their own lives, not just be manipulated by those who control media, among other things. And I think that right now we have to all admit democracy is in real trouble. I mean, it doesn't take, you know, Einstein's return to Earth to point out that the state of democracy in traditionally democratic nations is weaker than it's been in a long time. We see in the United States, for example, for the first time in memory, there's a relatively significant percentage of the population that no longer thinks democracy is really a necessary thing, because for obvious reasons, what they told us democracy hasn't done anything, so it's not working, what's called democracy. And I think that's a very troubling moment for us. I liked it back when everyone was claiming to be a Democrat, even if they weren't telling the truth. And then they started saying, no, we can just get rid of that one. The last time that happened was about 80-some years ago. And I think that there's a pessimism that comes with this, and I think everyone's struck with it, which is painful to me, because a year and a half ago, In the United States, there was a midst of a movement around the Sanders campaign of primarily young people and poor people that was unprecedented in America, at least for generations, going before the 60s even. And you have to go back to the 30s or 40s to see something like it. And the optimism among people under 30 in the country was simply off the charts. I'd never seen anything like it in my life, and I was pretty active in the campaign. And so then to be in this moment now where it's like that's already been thrown down the memory hole, that's been flushed down the toilet, we're in this sort of grim Trumpian world where it's hopeless, and now you just hope there's going to be a coup and someone better than Trump will run the world for us. Sort of a dark moment for all of us. And I think that this is, I'd like to just make the comment I'd like to make is, you say, why are you an optimist? And I sound like I'm painting such a dark picture. I'm actually spectacularly optimistic precisely because I've seen what's happening on the ground and how unreal this moment is, but it's very dangerous because when you're in power, you can do things that lock in these bad things, and that's the moment we're in right now. But the thing that I think we have to keep in mind is I think human beings, as a rule, if there's something that's human nature, this is part of it, we tend to take what's happening now and what's happened yesterday and assume that's what's going to happen tomorrow. And so we let the present and the past weigh on us very heavily and limit our imaginations. This was brought home to me when I was a much younger man, 30 years ago when I was finishing my PhD in Seattle. And one of my professors in my committee was a white South African who had moved to the United States because he opposed apartheid in the early 1960s, and he worked with the ANC. And his research was all on anti-apartheid movement in South Africa. So in 1988, I finished my degree, and I go in to say goodbye to him in his office. I'm about to move to Madison. And I go in, and he was uncharacteristically glum. And this is June of 1988. And I said, Tony, what's up? What's the problem? You know, I know you're sad to see me go, but it seems a little extreme. And he said, well, I've just been talking to my brother and all my comrades in South Africa, and they say it's hopeless. It's absolutely, the Afrikaans, the right has won. We can't beat them. The only way that will ever get justice for Africans in South Africa will be a bloodbath, and we'll all lose. Tens of millions of people will die. It's just hopeless. It's entrenched. My friends, people who can, are thinking about getting out of the country. This is June of 1988. I said, well, I can see why you're depressed. Yeah, doesn't sound good. Well, 2 years later, Nelson Mandela was released from Robben Island prison. 4 years after that, he was elected president of South Africa. And I think there was less violence in the intervening 6 years than there is in a New Jersey bar fight on a Saturday night. So my friend who knew more about South Africa than anyone I knew, who was an absolute expert, dedicated his life to studying it. In June of 1988, he and all the other experts were totally wrong, committed to anti-apartheid politics. They thought it was hopeless. And they were completely wrong. It was right before sunrise, and they thought it was over. And I think I keep that in my mind all the time. That no one saw anything positive that's ever happened ahead of time. No one saw the civil rights movement coming. No one saw the Sanders campaign coming. No one saw Occupy coming. After it happens, everyone's suddenly an expert. Oh yeah, I saw that one coming. Sure. No, you didn't, or you would have done it a year earlier. No one ever saw it. And that's the moment where now things are so extraordinarily volatile. We shouldn't lock down the possibilities of change. I think they are immense. We have to be open to them. What we have to do is just study stuff, put out ideas, and be prepared and be open-minded. And I think we have, everything historically suggests 5 years or 10 years, some period in the future, we're all going to be sitting around patting ourselves like, yeah, I saw that one coming. But we don't know. We haven't seen it coming. But it is coming. And all we can do is participate in it. And I think keep that in mind as you go forward.
Your comments collectively, just a couple of brief comments and then over to you folks. You mentioned Einstein and thinking do you remember the definition of insanity was doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result? It sort of applies to what we're talking about here, doesn't it? And also with respect...
You're saying we're insane?
No, just the opposite. And so, but with respect to the comment about education, I'll just remind you, well, maybe Manfred is hearing this for the first time, but the Broadcasting Act of 1991, and it draws the words forward from previous statutes governing broadcasting in Canada, says that the mission of the corporation, which is what they call the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, is to inform, enlighten, and entertain. And those words are not in alphabetical order in the statute. So presumably there's some kind of hierarchy between them. And I just underline the word enlighten, because the federal government has no constitutional competence over education under our constitutional documents, so they had to find a euphemism for education. So we are also talking in the media about a very powerful institution for learning, aren't we? And so it's not as if education and media are unconnected. So over to you. And the ground rules here are you can just say anything you like or ask a question, but just keep it short. Yeah.
Hi guys, thanks for being here today. So it's a very simple question. Recognizing that half our panel are Canadians, I'm still inviting your opinion. So the government has announced they'll be reviewing Canada's Broadcasting Act and its Telecom Act. So if you were to offer one suggestion during this review in terms of a change that could be made to strengthen Canadian broadcasting, be it public media or otherwise, what would that suggestion be?
That's a sort of 1, 2, 3, 4.
Well, we should start with the Canadians.
Oh my gosh.
Then I can go, yeah, that's a good idea.
Okay.
One thing I would like to see, which I don't want to seem like I'm the nostalgic one up here, but we had a Department of Communication in Canada until 1992. I think it needs to be brought back. I think we need a dedicated Department of Communication, not the split that we have with telecom seen as industry and broadcasting seen as something under heritage. And then the divide over spectrum and everything else. I think that one thing we can do is have a dedicated department looking at the issue of communication in Canada. And we've had it before. It was broken up for reasons that were never quite clear to me. And I think that that is something that we should consider as a country, to have one group overseeing communication. And then I would also add a complete overhaul of the CBC Board of Directors.
That's it?
I'm done. No,
Okay.
no, that's it. And then we'd be a perfect country.
Okay.
Raj asked for just one thing.
Okay, just one thing. I think the thing would be to declare digital platforms as public utilities. So that would, so I think along the lines that Bob mentioned. So that would affect the prices that we pay for our telecom service, which are extortionary. And when you're looking at access to broadband as a public need in this day and age, I think we absolutely need to reconceptualize telecoms as public utilities and manage their fees accordingly.
Not leave them as an unregulated monopoly. Manfred?
Well, I'm not so familiar with the actual debate here,
Okay.
so next question, please.
Well, that won't prevent me from talking. That's why I became a professor, after all.
Yeah.
I agree completely with Zoe's point, and I was actually going to say that I think it's even more true in the United States, where we pay vastly more for broadband for crappier service than anywhere in the world. It's unbelievable what a total hose job Americans get, because these lobbies own our government. It's just a crime. But since you took it, I'm going to add my other one. Going back to the point of my talk, I think Canada is going to have this discussion at some point. This seems like an awfully good time. How are we ever going to have journalism in this country when it's disappearing like the polar ice cap? I mean, it's just melting away. You've lost 30% of your journalists in 7 years. And there's no reason to think it's not just going to keep heading down to the drains, soaking it all up. It's a public policy issue, and it's time to get serious about it, come up with some answers. And this seems like the right time to start that discussion and that debate.
Hi, my name is Jeremy Weiser, and I have a startup which offers a video commenting platform to media outlets. We've actually just completed a pilot with the CBC, so there you go. Thank you so much for today. Highly enjoyable, and there were a lot of problems identified and a lot of interesting solutions proposed. Focusing, if we could, from an advocacy perspective, since that's part of what Friends does, and focusing in particular on decision makers and politicians as targets, I wonder what thoughts you would have on how to influence politicians and decision makers? Carrots, sticks, what are the things that might actually cause the Prime Minister on down to be willing to take action, whether it's because they think, you know, their electoral fortunes are threatened, or maybe looking at the American model because they think their own financial coffers are at play. Thank you.
Well, you know, I'll jump in first, because this is the issue I've dealt with in the United States with our group, Free Press. We're trying to force politicians and regulators to do stuff in the public interest when our system is structured where they would ignore the public altogether. They do largely ignore the public. But the principle is very simple. You try to do what the Friends has done so successfully, at least from what I can tell, or relatively successfully, which is get people informed of the issues, mobilize them, and put pressure on politicians. Even your best friends who get elected, boy, when the door shuts and, you know, they no longer see you out there and the other door opens and Rogers Communication walks in, or those guys, you know, the pressure is intense. The only solution, this goes back to the Greeks, the only solution is to have an army out the window that's making so much noise they can't shut the window. We don't keep the noise out. It's organized pressure, and that's what the Friends has done successfully. So I think it's really campaigns to get as many people aware and involved and put heat on. And it won't always work, but in our experience, that's the only thing that does work. Now, the only other option is, in the United States, if you can get two corporate giants duking it out with each other and you think one's got a slightly better case, you can try like mosquito, jump on their back and piggyback that side. But that limits the range of stuff you can do. Because in the case of public broadcasting, they're not that interested in that. So there's no corporate giants go to battle for your public broadcasting. It's on you, it's on the people. And almost all the great fights ultimately are on the people.
Well, as I said this morning, I think it's important to convince both the people and the politicians, because many politicians in the end, they look at what the majority is thinking, that a non-market provision of media has its advantages and its price, and public service broadcasting, at least in Europe, is a good model to provide non-market content. We can see it in the last years, I mentioned that already, how important a broad public communication is, including all groups, giving all groups the impression that they have the chance to express their opinions and they are heard, give them a voice, and even if they do not succeed with their opinions, give them the expression that they had a chance to articulate what their hopes and their fears were and the perspective, and then they also are rather willing to accept majority decisions. And we can see in some countries, just to mention the US or Turkey, that it's very dangerous if you do not have this integrating function of the media anymore. And the commercial media, they cannot do it anymore in the way we expected from them, because there are market competition forces that make it more complicated to fund them, make it more complicated to fund journalism, as you mentioned several times. So to sum it up, in my view, public service broadcasting, or more general, a non-market provision of content that is necessary to promote the free opinion making and the free collective decision making gets more and more important. And we have to try, although it's very complicated, to convince the citizens from that, and also the politicians. I think both, and the Friends do both. You know, they do some kind of lobby working, addressing directly to politicians who have to side with it. But in the long run, as I said, it's also necessary to convince the citizens, because not many politicians dare to decide in the long run, think that majorities and voters do not appreciate.
I guess I would say it's not easy to think of how it's going to turn a politician's mind around. I kind of try to look after the area in which I can do something, which is I write, I teach, and like Bob said, you try to stay positive, and you try to make sure that this debate is still up there, and that you're going after certain goals. I think that that's all still very useful. I'm particularly heartened to see tables of grad students here today. I mean, I take a look at my organization, the Canadian Communication Association. People stayed away from policy stuff for years when I started. This is going back, 5 to 10 years ago. I'm seeing more people getting engaged right now. And so is that going to get Justin Trudeau to worry about this during the night? I don't know, but you start getting people involved and engaged in this, in the issue of the politics of media, and I see this as a real positive. I give credit to the CRTC, who've worked with us over the last few years to establish a prize with the Canadian Communication Association to encourage work in this area. In the end, that's how I think we can start something. And I can't say I know exactly where it's going, but you try to get it started.
You're going to pass?
I'm passing.
Okay. Miles?
Hey, thanks everyone for your talks. My name is Miles Weaver. I'm a PhD candidate in communication and culture at York and Ryerson. I'm writing about the way people talk about the CBC, particularly during the tenure of Harper's Conservatives. Awesome. So we've heard a lot about the limitations of capitalism on Canada's broadcasting system, and they're obviously undeniable. But I was wondering if we could reconsider some of the limitations of nationalism on Canadian public broadcasting, and in fact, some of the limitations of broadcasting as a medium, some of the limitations that might have on public engagement. Greg, I know you're talking about the CBC's 2020 plan, and at the center of A Space for Us All was this idea of the space for us all was the internet, and this was a place where individuals would be able to contribute and actually be producers as well as a centralized broadcaster. But it seems to me that vision that CBC put forth, and then retracted, I guess, but the vision they did put forth in the first publication of A Space for Us All is kind of at odds with the unilateral operations of a national broadcasting network. And I think if we go back historically, Spry and Plante's Radio League, with the slogan Canadian Radio for Canadians, they wanted a series of high power stations in order, they wanted radio to be a force for national development. But at the same time elsewhere, there are people talking about radio, like Bertolt Brecht was addressing the potential for radio to be two ways. And instead of being something that would distribute things centrally to widespread audiences, the audience member themselves would be a purveyor of content as well. So the national element kind of just dropped out of Brecht's formulation. So I guess what I'm asking is this vision of public engagement, public participation, individuals as producers of programming that was so central to CBC's 2020, A Place for Us All, how might it be at odds, and how might it be congruent with the idea of an overarching national culture fostered by broadcasting? It's kind of a long-winded question.
That's such a great question. I'll just jump in just to say that I completely agree with you. I think the national project takes on different valences at different times. And so at certain moments in the 1920s in Canada or in the 1970s in Canada, it might seem more progressive. Today in the United States, it might seem, scarily regressive. And different places in the world, So yes, I think, and the challenge that the internet has kind of provided to the national frame is a good moment for us to rethink, what is this commitment to? What does it mean, Canadian broadcasting? What does it mean, Canadian nation state, Canadian identity, and all the rest, Canadian content, right? And as you guys know, our policymakers have huge problems now defining Canadian content. And it's gone into this kind of, actually always was, this very quantitative model that is easily manipulated, that doesn't necessarily lead to meaningful content and all the rest. So I 100% agree with you. We need to rethink the national frame. And I think we go back here to the question that Greg raised before, which is we need to get at what is it we want the policy to achieve. So if we want the policy to achieve a national identity, that's one thing. But if we want the policy to achieve, meaningful work that will circulate amongst a community of people who happen to live within these national borders, I think, and maybe have interests beyond. And I think, that's another thing. And I think we haven't fully kind of accounted for the way that many Canadians have dual and even multiple identities with other places around the world, and that programming to be meaningful for them needs to be in other languages, needs to address other national and regional frames. So I agree. I think part of what's happened is that the Canadian Nationalist Project becomes a kind of rearguard protectionist kind of vantage or a place to regroup, when actually this movement that the internet allows for of thinking beyond the national is actually a moment that we could be rethinking what it is we want to achieve with public media. And if it is visions of social justice, or if it is the good society, there's no reason that that has to be contained in a national frame. So absolutely agree with you. You end up, though, in the complicated situation, which is the nation-state apparatus is also where we're generating tax revenues and advertising revenues, and so corporate revenues and corporate taxes. So you start to see that it's actually part of this much bigger system, which is very, very hard to challenge. But I think it's important to challenge it, to question it, at least so that people have to articulate why it is they're defending it. And then at least we can start to open up that conversation. But I personally would find that very exciting, and I think a lot of the younger viewers that we're talking about, the absent younger viewers, would also find that more interesting, right? Because for them, nationalism does not, I'm speculating here from my encounters with them, but I don't think nationalism resonates as a progressive ideology for a lot of young people. And so we need to rethink it.
Yeah, I do think there's some rethinking that's necessary right now. And I think to bring up some of the history that you were referencing, and when you take a look at the first 100 years of broadcasting, a lot of that in Canada was anti-American, pro-British. And so I think that we're well past that now. And so it will be, what is the next stage? And I hope it's not endless debate over some national identity that we have to somehow attain. I hope it's more about democratic citizenship and engagement that we've been talking about today. And I think that this is something that the nation state is still the democratic entity that we have to deal with. So I don't think that the nation state's not going anywhere. We should be engaged as citizens. It should be our avenue to talk to each other as citizens. It should not be an avenue to say that this is what Canada is, but as far as a line of debate between citizens, absolutely, still as essential as it was 100 years ago.
Go ahead.
Well, this question in Europe has been discussed for a long time. And on the one hand, people realize that the nation state is something people like, it gives them security, but it also has been the root of evil, always. So the conflicting attitudes, and especially in time of the Brexit now, the discussion starts again. How far do we need to emphasize the capability of public service broadcasters to contribute to an European identity, which in the long run we are achieving for, and how much do we have to satisfy citizens' wishes to be member of a national identity. There's no one answer for it. It's just a way of relative importance people consider about it. And the different countries in Europe, as you know, they have different answers on that. So there's not one way where Europe goes. It's a problem for the European Commission, who, well, is a regulator of, in some respect, the regulator of the public service broadcasters. So if you don't have one direction, it's hard to regulate them in a way that they all are content with.
I just briefly commented, well, I'll riff off. Riff is okay, you're a music guy. Riff off your comment.
About copyright on that.
Yeah, copyright. Riff off what you said, where you said I mentioned that democracy was one of our values, and just to present the rest of that, because there were only two, right? Patriotism. And of course, the original meaning of the word, patria is associated with the territory, with the land. And natio is associated with, for nation, with the people. And possibly because Canada is clearly a multinational state, the management and the governance structure of the Friends of Canadian Broadcasting has studiously avoided the word nationalism. And we have always talked about patriotism, just because, people from all over, people who have an identity in Holland and Canada at the same time, they are still more Canadian, than ever, and the value of diversity being what it is. So we have always felt that that enabling people in a very heterogeneous country, you're on Haida Gwaii or you're on Prince Edward Island or something, how do you keep together? And there's a huge role of a broadcasting system to create centripetal forces that kind of help people to understand and appreciate each other and have a sense of belonging in a country like Canada. So with respect to the values that Miles brought up, I just toss in that that's something that we kind of do. We don't always say that, but since there was no one at a microphone, I thought I would just say it now.
I also just think we should point out that so much of what we're talking about right now is English Canada, and that a lot of a lot of the issues that are coming up here right now, Quebec doesn't talk about them. They don't need to. They're doing just fine. They're watching their own TV shows, and they have a much stronger media system that way. And I think a lot of what we've been talking about is more on the English Canadian side.
Yeah, if Hollywood operated in French, things would be different.
Yes.
So maybe we've reached a natural conclusion. I'm just giving a last chance if anybody wants to. Okay, but then I'm reading silence as consent to kind of wind up a few minutes early, and that makes life easier for you, Zoe. But I just want to say three things. The one is that, as I mentioned at the start, this exercise and the investment in this exercise is Friends of Canadian Broadcasting wanting to reach out and hold hands with people broadly in an academic community around shared interests and values. And so that's number one. And so we listen very hard, but not trusting our ears and our brains. We have a digital record. Jason, can you confirm? We've managed to get a digital record of everything that has been done today with very high quality sound. And we will be preparing a package about this event to share with you, but also with a much larger audience. I'm told by CCA folks that when I go to the listserv and put something in there, it goes to 1,240 people, and they will all get references with links to what happened here today. It's a larger secondary audience. And then of equal or even greater importance to us is to communicate some of these thoughts and the dialogue to our supporter base, those that we can reach digitally at least. And that's 190,000 families in this households in this country. So we will be doing that as well. And then finally, just to express thanks to the thought leadership that came in order from Bob and then Manfred and then Greg and Zoe. It would be hard for me to compare and contrast the contributions you made. I think you each gave us 25%. And I thank you very much for that. And to end on a somber note, I just want to present you each with a bobblehead doll. This is a bobblehead that we made of Justin Trudeau. And we made it in order, and I happened to bring one in English, but I could do this in the other official language. And you pull a little piece of paper out of the way so that the battery is engaged, and here's what happens. There we go. Can I just bring it up close to a microphone here?
First of all, we've seen most recently cuts of $115 million a year to the budget, and that's had a direct
So,
impact on
blah, blah, blah. He's talking about the values of public broadcasting, and we did this because partly in response to a demand that we organized in the late period of the Harper government. Trudeau effectively outbid the NDP on the CBC funding file and committed $675 million. And then actually in the first the first budget in March of 2016, the government actually acted on it. They cut and paste. Jim Thompson and I were in the budget lockup. We only had to work for 2 minutes. We knew exactly what the Liberal promise was, and there were the words right there in the federal budget. So there actually has been a reinvestment. So to share this with some of our supporters and also as a fundraising thing, we created some of these, but you don't have to pay for them. So each of you, and if you would rather travel light, I can arrange to send these to each of you. I'm not sure how easy it would be to send it into the United States, but it might work. I don't know.
Possible.
So, Greg,
Well, thank you.
Zoe, and because Manfred's in Toronto for the next few days, I will just tell him that he can have this, and I'll take it back if he likes. Okay. So, on your behalf, thank you very much for being here today. And we are ending 13 minutes before the stated time. Thank you.